The barrio slept different than the rest of the city. While downtown Los Angeles hummed with its endless electric buzz, while the freeways never stopped their concrete river flow, the neighborhood held onto a different rhythm. Older, slower, tied to the sun and the seasons and the sounds that marked time better than any clock. The first sound wasn't a sound at all. It was the absence of sound, that particular quality of silence that comes just before dawn, when the night shift workers have finally come home and the day shift hasn't yet stirred, when even the streets take a breath and hold it. In that silence you could hear your own heartbeat. You could hear the house settling, wood and stucco sighing like old bones. You could hear the future coming, rolling toward you on bicycle wheels and pushing steam carts, carrying bells that hadn't changed their tune in generations. Then came the roosters. Senor Martinez had 3 of them in his backyard. Illegal, everyone knew, but nobody complained because those birds were the neighborhood's alarm clock, more reliable than electricity, more honest than any radio DJ. They started just as the sky shifted from black to that deep purple blue that photographers call the magic hour. One would crow, then another would answer, then the third would join in, creating a symphony of territorial pride and avian punctuality. The sound carried over chain-link fences and through open windows, past sleeping children and restless abuelas who'd been awake for hours anyway, their bodies programmed by decades of early rising, their minds already making mental lists of the day ahead. Maria Esposito was always the first to hear what came next. She'd be at her kitchen window by 5:30, her hands wrapped around a cup of café de olla that steamed like a prayer, watching the street emerge from darkness like a photograph developing in a darkroom. She'd see old man Hernandez shuffle past on his way to open his little grocery store on the corner, his keys jingling like small bells. She'd see the streetlights click off one by one, their job done for another night. And then, faint at first, so faint you might think you imagined it, she'd hear the bell. The Paletero bell was distinctive, not the aggressive ring of an ice cream truck, not the electronic chime of modern commerce. It was a hand bell, brass and dented, its sound worn smooth by years of use. Ding ding, ding ding. A rhythm as old as Mexico itself, as familiar as breathing. The sound would grow louder as the cart approached, pushed by Don Tomás, who'd been selling paletas in this neighborhood since 1972, who knew every child by name and every parent by their ice cream preference. His cart was a masterpiece of folk art and engineering, painted bright white with hand-lettered signs advertising flavors, decorated with pictures of tropical fruit that were faded now but still vibrant enough to make your mouth water. The bells hung from the front, attached with wire that had been replaced a dozen times but never removed. Inside, packed in dry ice that smoked like magic when he lifted the lid, were paletas in flavors that told stories: tamarindo, Jamaica, limon, sandia, cocoa, mango con chili, horchata, piña. Each one was handmade by his wife at 3 in the morning, fruit and water and sugar and love frozen into something that could make a summer day bearable, that could make a sad child smile, that could transport a homesick adult back to Jalisco or Michoacán or wherever home used to be. Don Tomás would start at the top of the hill and work his way down, ringing his bell every few feet, his timing perfect. He knew that if he passed the house too early the kids would still be sleeping. Too late and they'd already be at school. There was a window, narrow and precious, when children were awake but not yet gone, when mothers had a quarter in their pocket and the willingness to start the day with something sweet. The children knew his schedule better than they knew their multiplication tables. They'd hear that bell and their bodies would react before their minds fully woke, feet hitting the floor, hands grabbing yesterday's shorts off the chair, voices calling, "Mama." "El Paletero," as they ran toward the front door or the kitchen window where their mothers stood with coins already counted out. "¿Qué quieres?" the mothers would ask, but they already knew the answer. Lupita always wanted limon. Miguel always wanted tamarindo. Little Rosa would spend 5 minutes agonizing between mango and sandia before choosing mango, always mango, every single time. These were the rituals that built childhood, the repetitions that created memory, the small moments that decades later would make adults cry for reasons they couldn't quite explain. Don Tomás would stop his cart, the bell going silent, and perform the ancient ceremony of the sale. He'd lift the heavy metal lid, releasing a cloud of cold smoke that made the morning heat recoil. His hands, weathered and strong, would reach into the frost and pull out exactly the right flavor without looking, as if the paletas called to him. He'd wrap each one in a napkin, thin, pink, useless against the melting but traditional nonetheless, and hand it to small eager hands while mothers passed coins through windows or over fences. "Gracias, Don Tomás," the children would chorus, already licking, already experiencing that first perfect moment when frozen fruit hit your tongue and your body remembered what joy tasted like. And he'd smile that never changed, that had smiled at these children's parents and would smile at these children's children, and say, "Que tengan un buen día, amiguitos," before ringing his bell again and moving down the street, leaving behind only the ghost of cold air and the sound of that bell growing fainter until it disappeared entirely, swallowed by the distance and the day. But the morning symphony was only beginning. 20 minutes after the Paletero passed, another sound would emerge, different, deeper, more urgent. "Elotes, elotes calientes." The call would start far away and build, A male voice trained by years of street vending, a voice that could cut through traffic and television and the general noise of life. The elotero man pushed a different kind of cart, this one crowned with a metal container that held corn in steaming water, a small flame keeping everything hot, the corn pale yellow and perfect, waiting to be transformed. His name was Raúl, though everyone called him El Elotero de la Mañana because there was another elotero who came in the evenings and they needed to be distinguished. Raúl had started this route in 1979, taking over from his uncle who'd worked it since the 1960s. His cart was more utilitarian than artistic, metal and practical, built for function not beauty, but it carried treasures that made the neighborhood's mornings bearable. The smell hit you before the sound did if you were downstairs or had your windows open. That particular scent of corn boiling in water, sweet and earthy and fundamental, mixed with the anticipation of what came next, the transformation. Because nobody bought corn from Raúl to eat it plain. Plain corn was for Iowa, for white people who didn't understand that corn was a canvas waiting for paint. The ritual was specific and sacred. Raúl would pull an ear from the steaming water, spear it with a wooden stick and hold it out like an offering. "Con to do?" he'd ask, and the answer was always yes, always con to do, always with everything. He'd take a brush, the kind painters use, worn soft from use, and slather the corn with mayonnaise, coating every kernel in white creaminess. Then cotija cheese, crumbled from a block he kept wrapped in plastic, sprinkled thick like snow until the yellow disappeared beneath white. Chili powder next, dusted from a shaker with holes clogged from humidity and use, turning everything red like sunset. Finally, a lime wedge cut that morning, squeezed until the juice ran down and mixed with everything else, creating a flavor combination that was somehow greater than its parts. The adults bought from Raúl. The men heading to construction sites, the women on their way to clean houses in Beverly Hills, the abuelas who'd already been to 6 o'clock mass and were walking home. They'd stand in the street, eating their elotes with both hands, mayo and cheese on their fingers, not caring, not thinking about anything except this moment, this perfect bite, this reminder of why they stayed in this neighborhood even when rents went up and kids moved away. "Why como están las cosas, Raúl?" someone would ask, and he'd shrug, that particular shrug that meant things were hard but you kept going, that meant money was tight but family was fed, that meant this was life and you didn't complain because complaining didn't change anything. "Aquí nomás working," he'd say, already preparing the next elote, his hands moving with the efficiency of decades, each motion precise and practiced. "Why ustedes?" And they'd talk, these brief morning conversations that built community one corn cob at a time, these moments of connection that meant more than people realized, that created the social fabric that held neighborhoods together when everything else tried to tear them apart. The sound of Raúl's cart would fade as he moved down the street, his voice calling, "Elotes," growing distant, replaced by the sounds of a neighborhood fully waking now, screen doors slapping closed, car engines turning over, mothers yelling for children to hurry up or they'd be late. And then, from a dozen houses, sometimes more, came the sound that tied it all together, the radio. Every Latino household had one, usually in the kitchen, usually tuned to the same station, KLAX or KLOS or one of the Spanish-language stations that played the soundtrack of their lives. The radios were old, most of them boxy things with fake wood paneling or bright plastic cases, antennas bent or missing, volume knobs that only worked if you turned them just right. But they worked, and that's what mattered. They connected the barrio to itself, created a shared experience of sound. In the morning, it was usually Domingo Severo or someone like him. A DJ whose voice was smooth as tequila, whose laugh was infectious, who knew exactly what songs to play to make dishwashing bearable and breakfast preparation feel like celebration. He'd play cumbias to wake you up, boleros to make you remember your youth, rancheras to make your heart hurt in ways that felt good. Between songs, he'd tell jokes, announce community events, give shout-outs to listeners who'd called in. "Este vie para la señora Martinez en el este de los," he'd say, and everyone in the neighborhood would wonder if it was their Martinez or the other Martinez or the third Martinez, because there were at least 5 Martinez families within 3 blocks and they couldn't all be related but probably were somehow. The music would spill out of windows and doorways, creating a canopy of sound that covered the entire neighborhood. You'd hear the same song from multiple houses, slightly out of sync because of distance and delay, creating an echo effect that was disorienting and beautiful. You'd hear Vicente Fernandez singing about heartbreak while women made tortillas. You'd hear Los Tigres del Norte narrating the struggles of immigration while men tied their work boots. You'd hear Selena's voice, young and pure, while daughters got ready for school and tried to replicate her makeup. The radio announcers became family. Families knew their voices better than they knew some of their own cousins. They knew their jokes, their tics, the way they'd clear their throat before making an important announcement. When a favorite DJ left a station or passed away, the neighborhood mourned collectively, genuinely, because these voices had been present for every important moment: births and deaths, weddings and divorces, good news and bad. Teresa Gonzalez would stand at her stove, making eggs and beans, listening to the radio and feeling connected to something larger than herself. She'd hear the same cumbia from her neighbor's house 2 doors down, and even though they hadn't spoken in weeks, just waved from cars, just nodded in passing, she felt bound to them through this shared sonic experience. They were both listening to the same joke, both hearing the same announcements, both moving their hips to the same rhythm even if no one was watching. The children would leave for school with those songs in their heads, humming melodies they didn't fully understand, lyrics in Spanish that meant something different when you translated them but something true when you felt them. They'd walk past houses still sleeping, past houses fully awake, past Don Tomás who'd be on his second loop now, past Raúl setting up on a different corner, past dogs who knew them and dogs who didn't, past all the small landmarks that made this neighborhood theirs. And all of it, the roosters and the Paletero bell and the elotero's call and the radio songs, wove together into something that couldn't be separated, that was more than sound, that was identity, that was home. These weren't just noises. They were the rhythm of life itself, the metronome by which the Barrio measured its days. By 9 a.m. the morning symphony would begin to fade. The Paletero would be on the far end of his route. The elotero would be sold out or close to it. The radio would shift to mid-morning programming, less music, more talk. The children would be in school. The workers would be at work. The neighborhood would settle into its daytime personality, quieter, slower, waiting for the evening when everyone would return and the cycle would begin again. But those morning sounds lingered. They lived in the walls of houses, in the memory of people who'd moved away, in the DNA of children who'd grow up and move to suburbs with no street vendors and no Spanish radio stations and no roosters announcing the dawn. Those sounds were ghosts that haunted in the best possible way, reminders of a time and place where community was built through shared rhythms, where commerce happened face to face, where the day began not with alarm clocks but with bells and calls and songs. Dona Carmen, who'd lived in the same house since 1968, would sometimes sit on her porch in the afternoon, after the sounds had passed, and remember. She'd remember when the Paletero was Don Tomás's uncle. She'd remember when there were 3 eloteros competing for customers. She'd remember when every single house had a radio playing, when the music was so loud you couldn't escape it even if you wanted to. She'd remember and she'd worry because change was coming, because street vendors were being pushed out by regulations and complaints from new residents who didn't understand the culture. Because kids didn't play in the streets anymore like they used to. Because the radios were being replaced by iPods and computers and streaming services that let you listen to whatever you wanted instead of what the community was listening to together. But for now, for this morning and tomorrow morning and every morning for as long as the sounds held out, the Barrio would wake to its symphony. The roosters would crow. The Paletero bell would ring. The elotero would call. The radios would play. And for just a little while as dawn broke over East Los Angeles, everything would be exactly as it should be. These were the sounds that built a culture. The sounds that marked territory not with violence but with music. The sounds that said, this is our neighborhood, these are our streets, this is how we live. The sounds that children would remember decades later, sitting in corporate offices or suburban homes, suddenly overwhelmed by nostalgia for a time when morning meant something different, when the day began with the promise of frozen fruit and hot corn and songs that everybody knew. The sounds that woke El Barrio were more than sounds. They were prayers and promises. They were history and hope. They were the threads that woven together created the fabric of community, the glue that held people together when everything else tried to pull them apart. And every morning, as sure as the sun rose and the roosters crowed, those sounds would come again. The bell, the call, the music, the sounds of home.